Okay, we have a Neuvillette rerun incoming, and naturally the big question is, should you get him? Yes. We're here with Neuvillette and Masanori. Alright, here's the thing. Neuvillette is really, really strong. Okay? Let me just make that very, very clear. He's very, very strong. But he's not universal, okay? Neuvillette has a lot of things that go for him. Number one, he does a lot of damage. Number two, he can heal himself. Number three, he can sap his own health, which is actually really good post 4.0 because, you know, Marechausse. Number four, he's not burst reliant. And number five, his gameplay is very straightforward. Now, of course, his damage mainly comes from his charge attacks, which of course makes his gameplay pretty straightforward, but his ult is also very powerful. Just keep that in mind. Okay, the only real problem that Neuvillette has is, aside from those who for some reason don't like him as a person, I mean, come on, look at him. How do you not like him? But if you don't like him for whatever reason, don't get him, obviously. But for those who are trying to find a reason not to get him, it's that he's strictly an on-field DPS. And he's a very oppressive on-field DPS at that, in the sense that if you ever put him on any team, even if it's a team that could very well have been for someone else, nah, sorry, it's a Neuvillette team now. That's the way it works, okay? Part of that is because he just does a lot of damage. Because, guess what? Spoiler alert, he's the Hydro Dragon Sovereign. And Hoyoverse, in their infinite wisdom, decided to make him lore accurate, so that's exactly what he is. We're back here with Masanori. Alright, so there's many variations and permutations of Neuvillette teams, so to keep things nice and simple, I'm going to show you two. This one is one of my favorites. It is Forward Vape Neuvillette. Something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, honestly. And as you can see, we are basically using the burning reaction. We're essentially playing Bain-Marie, but we're using the burning reaction to randomly forward vape one of Neuvillette's charge attack ticks, so that where they normally do around about 25 to 30,000 damage, suddenly one of them does somewhere around the 70 to 80,000 damage, and that's really, really nice, okay? Bringing the higher is particularly good for a team like this because the idea is that you don't need to rely on something like Shangling's Burst in order to have that off-field pyro, so that's really, really cool. Now, of course, there was one character in particular who was released after Neuvillette, who was very, very good for Neuvillette. I think you know who I'm talking about. We're of course talking about Furina. And so we have Neuvillette Furina teams. There's just basically 3,000 permutations of this. But suffice to say, this one is probably my favorite. My personal recommendation is kind of a freeze team, but not really a freeze team. It's, I mean, yeah, okay, Masanori is frozen for about a second. But not really. It's Mono Hydro, let's be real here. This is a team where Neuvillette's total DPS would be higher than Forward Vape, but obviously Forward Vape is kind of more hilarious than playing a team like this. But either way, this team is really, really solid. Now, Neuvillette and Furina working hand in hand also makes it lore accurate as well, which is something that we like to see. But here's the thing. I personally prefer bringing a team healer like Mika or Baiju, I guess, to heal both Kaz and Furina so that we can maximize the damage of Furina's Salon Solitaire, but also maximize the amount of fanfare that we can get really, really quickly. You don't actually need to bring a healer for a Neuvillette Furina team if you want to get maximum fanfare, because Neuvillette kind of sorts that out by himself anyway, but of course if you use a healer, you get it right from the jump, so that's of course really, really nice. You instead can bring someone like Zhongli for some more res shred and potentially even a shield. Like you can bring a shielder, Xin Yan, the higher even. Perfectly good ideas. They can actually negate the need for C1, so there's an idea there. Otherwise, you can also increase the damage with Neuvillette and Furina if you're bringing someone like Zhongli. So the Neuvillette, Zhongli, Kazuha, and Furina team is actually somewhat popular. You are basically going to be relying on Neuvillette's self-heal and self-drain in order to get that fanfare for Furina though, so just keep that in mind. Alternative to Furina would be probably, in my opinion, Mona. Obviously, this is not going to be nearly as strong of a team as the Neuvillette Furina team, but Mona's nice. You still get most of the damage bonus that you would get from Furina, you kind of just lose out on the off-field Hydra application and the off-field Hydra damage, rather. But keep in mind, Neuvillette does a lot of damage. So just by himself, he's usually A-okay. Now, let's just keep in mind how Neuvillette's charge attack works, okay? I want to go into a little bit of detail about that for those who don't have Neuvillette and are curious how this works. If you just do a normal charge attack, it will take a long time to charge up. But Neuvillette's skill and ult generate these balls that are on the ground. Turns out Hydro main character works as well. So if you were to absorb 3 balls on the ground, your charge attack charges up instantly. And you charge your charge attack up and absorb those balls during your charge attack. So just basically start charging up and you're good to go. On top of that, your skill makes 3 balls, your ult makes 6. So the idea is that if you use your skill and your ult, you get to do 3 very, very fast charge attacks. So that's really, really nice. You know who else gets to do 3 very, very fast charge attacks after using their skill and ult, I guess? Tignari. So anyone who has played Tignari before, I think you know how nice that would feel, okay? On top of that, when you're using Neuvillette's charge attack, you get to float around, so you're not stuck in place, which is really, really nice. And then on top of that, if you're using Neuvillette in a Furina team, Neuvillette's healing that comes from absorbing balls, it can potentially trigger overhealing, and that is kind of one of the reasons why a healer-less Neuvillette Furina team is fine, because you're kind of using Neuvillette's overhealing as a way of triggering Furina's passive so that she can sort of slowly heal the rest of the team by a bit. It's not a massive amount of healing, but it's nice. You can also spin to win with Neuvillette. For some reason, the way that the charge attack ticks are calculated and counted, it seems to be like frame accurate or something like that. So if you're going up against a large group of enemies, just spinning to win is an option. I personally hate doing that, so you will never see me do that. But it's an option, which is why people do that, because it does actually maximize DPS even more. I think it's stupid, but it doesn't matter. Now, Neuvillette also has a passive. It's his A1 passive, where triggering Hydro reactions affects how much damage his charge attacks do, okay? In a rainbow team like the Forward Vape Neuvillette team, where we have Cryo, Dendro, and Pyro as well, the team by itself can trigger Vaporize, Bloom, and Freeze. Even if the target can't be frozen because, let's say, it's a boss, it still counts. Just trigger Freeze. You don't have to freeze the enemy, you just trigger Freeze, right? This ultimately results in plus 60% charge attack damage, okay? Now, if you happen to be playing like a Neuvillette Furina team, because Neuvillette and Furina are both Hydro characters, the only other 2 characters on the team would have to be 2 different elements, which means, let's say, for example, the Neuvillette, Zhongli, Kaz, and Furina team, you'd get Crystallize and Hydro Swollen, that's it, right? Ultimately, this would result in 25% charge attack damage, as it increases part of Neuvillette's passive. But here's the thing. It's not necessarily your team comp that determines how much damage your Neuvillette gets to do, although that will help. If you are fighting enemies that have auras, like for example Pyro Mages that have Pyro auras, and you don't have Pyro on your team, and therefore you're not triggering Vaporize from your team, but you're triggering Vaporize from hitting the Pyro aura, that counts too. And it seems to me that when Hoyoverse are trying to sell Neuvillette in through their Spiral Abyss, there's a good chance you're going to be coming across some Pyro auras of some description. And so that's how they sell Neuvillette. So yeah, even if you're playing a Neuvillette Furina team and you're going up against Pyro Mages, you're going to get your full stacks. So that means that Neuvillette gets to do all of the damage. And that's really, really nice. This is a base damage multiplier buff, by the way. I got confused whether or not this was a base damage multiplier buff or a damage percent buff. It's actually a base damage multiplier buff, which actually kind of makes it better. Now, it's not better if you're relying on characters like Layla, for example, to try and increase your damage. But it is better for the most part because characters like Furina and Kaz can then buff the base damage multiplier buff itself. The math is all over the place, but essentially the idea is that this is not something that gets diminished in terms of its effectiveness when you are playing a team with someone like Kaz and Furina. Instead, this is something that kind of works in tandem with Kaz and Furina, so getting your 3 stacks is quite important. Of course, if you're playing Neuvi, Furina, and you're not going up against, let's say, Pyro Mages, you'll still be fine. It's still not a bad idea to play Neuvi, Furina anyway, because the team is still so ludicrously strong that losing out on 1 stack of your passive, while it's a little bit annoying, it's not the worst thing. It's not the end of the world. So you'll be fine. Alright, enough of that. Let's have a look at building Neuvillette. When it comes to his weapons, there's only 3 weapons that matter. The rest of the weapons are somewhere between and no. But either way, the 3 weapons that matter are, of course, Tome of the Eternal Flow. Now, Tome of the Eternal Flow is, of course, his signature weapon. It has low base attack and high crit damage, which is really, really good for someone who scales exclusively off HP. So, Tome of the Eternal Flow is really, really good. On top of that, it gives him some energy. Now, apparently, that basically means that his ER requirements are none. So if you're into that, that's great. In my opinion, I don't think that's particularly important. Mainly because I don't really feel like he has energy problems to begin with. Like I said, the majority of his damage comes from his charge attacks. So as long as you're able to do charge attacks, you're kind of good to go. Of course, his ult is still great. So, you know, packing some ER is great as well. But, like, I only have, what, 125 ER on my build? And I don't have any energy problems. Couple of substats, you're good. So yeah, in my opinion, I feel like this is unnecessary. But you can get it if you want. The weapon that I'm using is Sacrificial Jade. This is the second weapon that is really good on him. Now, this is a new Battle Pass weapon. It's low base attack, high crit rate. It's got 36.8% crit rate, and if you pair it with the artifact set that I'll talk about a little bit later, Marechausse Hunter, you basically have 72.8% crit rate right from the jump, which means you kind of don't need crit rate substats or even crit rate stats on your artifacts afterwards. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but essentially, I personally like the idea of using Sacrificial Jade. On top of that, it also gives you a bunch of EM, which is particularly nice if you're playing forward Vape Neuvillette, because obviously EM will increase your forward Vape damage. So that's wonderful. Now, there are some calculations out there that determine the power difference between Tome of the Eternal Flow and Sacrificial Jade. Now, obviously, if you're playing R5 Tome of the Eternal Flow, that is going to be significantly better than pretty much every weapon that exists for Neuvillette, obviously. But when we compare R1 Tome to, let's say, R1 Sac Jade, which is what I have right now, apparently it is around about 22% stronger. But if you compare R1 Tome to R5 Sac Jade, which only costs $50 over the course of 5 patches, it's only 8% stronger. Meaning that it's marginally stronger. Now, it's probably going to cost you more than $50 to get Tome of the Eternal Flow, let's be real here, unless you get particularly lucky. So, there's an idea. In my opinion, if you want my recommendation, I'd probably go with Sac Jade, because with the $50 that you're spending on R5 Sac Jade, you also get just a lot of other stuff, including wishes and also Primo Gems as well, as opposed to potentially not getting your Tome of the Eternal Flow. Just a thought. Either way, both of these weapons are particularly good on him. I'm sticking with my Sac Jade, and that's why I'm not going to be getting Tome of the Eternal Flow myself. And then finally we have Prototype Amber. Now, Prototype Amber, of course, is a craftable weapon. It's also a healer weapon. You're effectively playing Medic Neuvillette. But the funny thing about Medic Neuvillette is that because he's an HP scaling DPS character, he's also still a DPS Neuvillette. So it's actually a perfectly serviceable craftable weapon. Now, it is actually additionally nice for Furina teams because you get that team healing from Prototype Amber. So there's an idea. And on top of that, it does give Neuvillette some energy, especially at R5, which once again makes his energy requirements non-existent. So, yeah, giving him Prototype Amber is unironically not a bad idea at all. Of course, because I have Sacrificial Jade, it's just my personal preference to not do Prototype Amber on Neuvillette, but it's totally an option that is actually worth going for. Anything else that gives you crit, HP, or charge attack damage bonuses is okay. but apparently they're all so close or actually worse than Prototype Amber that I'd say they're pointless. So yeah, keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to Neuvillette's artifact sets, it's Marechausse Hunter, that's it. Don't think, just farm that set. Unlike other on-fielders that get recommended Marechausse Hunter, Neuvillette doesn't need Furina on his team in order to make use of Marechausse, because he pretty much sorts that out himself. So that's really good. The self-health drain, the HP drain that comes from him, it's actually small increments, which is why Marechausse works really well on him. The heal is one fat increment, but the drain isn't. So that's really nice. Until you get a usable set of those artifacts, though, you can make use of 4-piece Heart of Depth. It's fine. Like, it's whatever. It's a lot of damage percentage you can get from that particular artifact set, which is nice. It's nice, but the crit rate is better. Or you can use 2-piece, Hydro, and HP. Again, it's nice. It's whatever. Just hold on to it until you farm a good Marechausse build, and then just stick with the Marechausse build. That's it, right? And for artifact stats, I'm sticking with HP Hydro Crit. Now, if you're using Furina, you could potentially look at using an HP Cup, because Furina gives a lot of damage percent. And if you're using Furina and Kaz, it might actually be a really good idea to try and find an HP Cup. But of course, my HP Cup has 34% crit damage, so that's not going to change. I'm sticking with that myself. And if you're using Tome of the Eternal Flow, apparently you could potentially look into using an HP Hat instead. That might even be the case if you're using Sack Jade. But ultimately, look, you have Masanori, test all of your damage out against him, see what happens. But generally speaking, I would probably say HP Hydro Crit is the way to go. And if you're playing forward rate Neuvillette, if your EM is somehow not 200, yeah, you can have a crack at running EM Hydro Crit as well. Sure, why not? Now let's look at Neuvillette's Constellations. Now, okay, let me start off by saying, you know how I just kept saying that Neuvillette is really strong? That's based off my experience of Neuvillette. And my experience of Neuvillette is a top 20%, so, you know, not even a particularly good build on Neuvillette, and he's C0. You don't need Constellations on Neuvillette. You absolutely do not need Constellations on Neuvillette. That being said, let's look at them anyway, because C1 means that even your Furina teams can max stack without needing enemy auras, so that's really nice. C2 is a bunch of crit damage on your charge attacks, which of course is also really good. Keep in mind though, your build probably already has a lot of crit, so consider a crit rate hat, or consider an HP hat if you're going to run C2. C3 and C5 are actually both pretty nice. Of course, C3 is his normal attack talents, which actually basically means his charge attack talents, which is more damage. But then C5 is also pretty nice, because here's the thing. C5, or rather his ult, which is what C5 affects, it actually does quite a decent amount of damage. It basically does 5 charge attack ticks worth of damage. That's what it is. So you should definitely invest into your ult. And while you're at it, invest into your skill as well, because your skill actually does about 1 and a bit or so charge attack ticks worth of damage. It's nice. But if you're going to not invest on anything, it will probably be his skill. But his ult is definitely something worth putting some resources into. Or just do what I did. Triple crown him. Then we also have C4, which is vaguely useful. It is whatever. I think the idea is that if you use a skill burst and you get your 3 quick charge attacks, if you have C4, you can get an additional quick charge attack. So that's nice. And then of course C6 is how you get the continuous bite and blast. And it's pretty nice. It's basically a continuous hosing. And you also get some additional damage on top of that. Great. It's a lot of damage. If you want to know what C6 looks like, just look at Bran Online. He has C6 Neuvillette. Fucking whale. It also makes C4, like, unironically better, because you're going to be generating those orbs through C4. to get even more bite and blasting, so that's really nice. That's Neuvillette. He does a lot of damage, he's ludicrously overpowered, and pretty much against anything that isn't Hydro immune, he pretty much destroys all of it. So that's great. On top of that, Furina exists to buff Neuvillette because I guess he needed more power. And look, in the end, you know your character is strong when there are people who are unironically playing solo Neuvillette speedruns in the Spiral Abyss. And they're not even high con Neuvillette. Like, bruh. That's kind of wild. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments below. How do you feel about Neuvillette? Let me know in the comments. Do you have him? Are you going to get him? That's the big question. Or do you intend to still save for Arlecchino, which of course is a perfectly valid reason to not get Neuvillette as well. Because Arlecchino is incoming and she's looking fantastic. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Into the wind. As one with wind and cloud.
Bow your head. The tides beckon. Be not perturbed. Unscathed. Settle down.
Let my name echo in song.
Neutralizing threats. Let's keep one with nature. Clouds high. The birds
Bow your head. Let the mighty be humble.